The coffee cup shattered on marble floor, hot liquid spreading across expensive Italian tile like blood at a crime scene. Nathaniel Hayes, billionaire, widower, emotional wreck, stood frozen in the break room doorway, staring at the woman who'd just caught him looking. Again. For the third time that week. Ava Morales didn't flinch, didn't look away. Instead, she set down her phone, met his eyes directly, and said the 6 words that would destroy every wall he'd spent 5 years building. If you want to look, you can just ask. That's when Nathaniel realized he was in serious trouble. Before we dive into this mess of a love story, do me a favor, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. Nathaniel Hayes didn't believe in second chances anymore. At 32, he'd already buried a wife, survived a relationship so cold it made Austin winters feel tropical, and built an empire that put his name on Forbes lists he never wanted to be on. His real estate company owned half the luxury properties between Houston and Dallas, and people whispered his name in boardrooms like he was some kind of genius. He wasn't. He was just good at not feeling anything. The penthouse office on the 43rd floor reflected that philosophy perfectly. Glass, steel, leather, and absolutely nothing personal except a single framed photo of his daughter tucked in a desk drawer where visitors wouldn't see it. Nathaniel had learned early that showing vulnerability in business was like bleeding in shark-infested water. His assistant, Margaret, 60 years old, ruthlessly efficient, and the only person who'd survived working for him longer than 18 months, knocked twice before entering. The temp agency sent someone for the administrative contract, she said, tablet already pulled up with the file. Ava Morales, 30 years old, relocated from Seattle 3 weeks ago. References check out, but honestly, they're thin. She's been jumping between contract work for the past 2 years. Nathaniel didn't look up from the acquisition report he was reviewing. Can she use Excel without calling IT every 15 minutes? Her skills assessment was perfect. Then why are we having this conversation? Margaret adjusted her glasses, which meant she was about to say something he wouldn't like. Because she doesn't fit the usual profile. No degree from a prestigious university, no connections, no family money. She's been living in a studio apartment in Riverside that costs $600 a month. So she's broke and desperate. Nathaniel signed the report without reading the last 3 pages. Perfect. Desperate people work harder and complain less. Send her up tomorrow at 8. Margaret didn't move. Nathaniel finally looked up. What? Nothing. But her expression said everything. That look that meant you're being an asshole again, and one day you'll regret it. He ignored it. He'd gotten good at that too. Ava Morales showed up at 7:45 the next morning, wearing a blazer that had been professionally cleaned so many times the fabric looked tired, carrying a coffee that definitely wasn't from the artisan place in the lobby, and holding herself like someone who'd been underestimated her entire life and learned to expect it. Nathaniel noticed all of this in the 3 seconds it took her to walk from the elevator to Margaret's desk. He noticed other things too, the way she didn't smile automatically when Margaret greeted her. The way her eyes went straight to the cityscape outside the windows, like she was cataloging escape routes. The way she set her cheap coffee down carefully, precisely, like someone who couldn't afford to replace things if they broke. And he noticed, though he'd deny it if anyone asked, that she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with the polished, salon-perfect women who usually orbited his world. No designer clothes, no practiced charm, just dark eyes that looked like they'd seen enough bullshit to fill a library, and a mouth that seemed physically incapable of fake smiling. "Mr. Hayes will see you now," Margaret said, and Nathaniel realized he'd been staring through his office glass like a creep. He turned back to his computer screen, pulling up emails he'd already read. The knock on his door was quiet but firm. "Come in." Ava entered his office the way someone might enter a courtroom, aware that everything she said would be used against her, but refusing to apologize for existing anyway. She didn't gawk at the view or the furniture or the original Rothko on the wall that cost more than most people's houses. She just stood there, waiting. "Sit," Nathaniel said, not looking up. She sat. He let the silence stretch, a technique he'd perfected over years of negotiating with people who talked too much when they got nervous. Most people cracked within 30 seconds, filling the air with babbling justifications and desperate qualifications. Ava said nothing. After 45 seconds, Nathaniel was counting. He finally looked up. She was watching him with an expression that wasn't quite amusement, but wasn't far from it. Like she recognized the power play and found it mildly entertaining, but ultimately predictable. Your resume has gaps, he said. Yes. Want to explain them? Not particularly. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. That's not how job interviews usually work. This isn't a job interview. Ava's voice was calm, factual. It's a contract position. You've already seen my skills assessment. You know I can do the work. Everything else is just you deciding whether I'll be sufficiently grateful for the opportunity. Something sparked in Nathaniel's chest that he hadn't felt in years. Genuine surprise. You think I care about gratitude? I think you care about control. She said it without malice, just observation. The temp agency mentioned you've gone through 11 administrative assistants in the past 2 years. That's not a pipeline problem. That's a management problem. Maybe they weren't qualified. Maybe you're difficult to work for. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was something else. Something Nathaniel couldn't quite name because he'd spent so long avoiding anything that felt remotely like honest human interaction. Then Ava did something that changed everything. She smiled. Not a customer service smile. Not a placating smile. A real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face shift into something that punched straight through Nathaniel's carefully maintained indifference. Look, she said, I need this job. I'm 3 weeks behind on rent. My car sounds like it's threatening suicide every time I start it. And I've been eating dollar store ramen so consistently that I'm pretty sure my blood is 20% sodium at this point. So I'm not going to pretend I don't need this. But I'm also not going to pretend you're not being an asshole just to see if I'll take it. Nathaniel stared at her. If you want someone who'll kiss your ass and never push back, hire one of the sorority girls downstairs who think working for a billionaire is romantic. If you want someone who will actually do the job and tell you when you're making things harder than they need to be, hire me. Either way, I need an answer by noon because I have 2 other interviews today, and I can't afford to waste time on maybe. She stood up, smoothed her tired blazer, and walked toward the door. Miss Morales? She turned. You start Monday. 8 a.m. Don't be late. For the first time since entering his office, Ava looked genuinely surprised. Seriously? I don't joke about staffing decisions. Good to know. She nodded once, professional again. I'll be here. After she left, Nathaniel sat in his office for 10 full minutes, staring at the space where she'd been standing, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Margaret appeared in his doorway, wearing an expression that was dangerously close to smug. Don't, Nathaniel warned. I didn't say anything. You're thinking it. I'm thinking a lot of things. Margaret set a folder on his desk. The Riverside property acquisition needs your signature, and you have dinner with the mayor at 7. Cancel it. You've already canceled twice. He's getting annoyed. Then let him be annoyed. Nathaniel signed the folder without reading it. I need to pick up Emma from school today. That made Margaret pause. Nathaniel never picked up his daughter on weekdays. He paid people for that. Good people who were better at the warmth and patience parts of parenting than he'd ever managed to be. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. He stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence. I just want to see her. Margaret's expression softened in a way that made Nathaniel immediately uncomfortable. I'll reschedule the mayor. And Nathaniel? What? Miss Morales is right. You are difficult to work for, but maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. She left before he could respond. Emma Hayes was 7 years old, obsessed with marine biology despite living in a landlocked city, and the only person on Earth who could make Nathaniel feel like a complete human being instead of a functional sociopath in an expensive suit. She came running out of the private school pickup area wearing her backpack sideways and one shoe untied, nearly tackling him in a hug that smelled like cafeteria pizza and strawberry shampoo. Dad, what are you doing here? Where's Maria? Maria was the nanny. The third one in 2 years, though this one seemed to be working out because Emma actually liked her and hadn't staged any creative rebellions yet. I gave her the afternoon off, Nathaniel said, fixing her backpack straps and crouching to tie her shoe. Thought we could hang out, just us. Emma's eyes went wide with the kind of dramatic suspicion only 7-year-olds could pull off. Are you dying? What? No. Why would you think that? Because you never pick me up from school unless someone's dying. or you did something bad and you're trying to make up for it. She studied his face carefully. Did you fire Maria? I did not fire Maria. I just wanted to spend time with my daughter. Is that a crime? It's weird. Thanks for that. You're welcome. She's grabbed his hand as they walked toward his car. Not the Aston Martin he drove to impress clients, but the Range Rover that had car seats and juice box stains and actual evidence of human life. Can we get ice cream? It's 4 o'clock. That's not a no. Nathaniel looked down at his daughter, at the gap-toothed smile and the hope in her eyes, and felt the familiar ache of knowing he was failing her in ways he couldn't quite fix. He worked too much. He was emotionally unavailable. He'd let her grow up in a house full of expensive things and empty rooms because he didn't know how to fill the spaces his wife had left behind. But he could buy her ice cream. Yeah, he said, we can get ice cream. Emma cheered and started listing every flavor she'd ever considered trying, a monologue that lasted the entire drive to Amy's Ice Cream on Guadalupe Street. They sat outside at one of the metal tables, Emma destroying a scoop of Mexican vanilla with hot fudge, while Nathaniel nursed black coffee and pretended the sugar high wouldn't make bedtime a nightmare. Dad? Do you ever get lonely? The question hit him like a physical blow. He set down his coffee carefully, buying time. What makes you ask that? Emma shrugged, suddenly fascinated by her ice cream. I don't know. Maria says you work a lot because you're lonely, but I told her that's stupid because you have me. Nathaniel felt something crack in his chest. You're right. I have you. But do you have friends? I have business associates. That's not the same thing. She said it with the absolute certainty of childhood wisdom. Friends are people you like even when they're not useful. Where did you hear that? I made it up, but it's true. She looked up at him, chocolate on her chin, and asked the question that destroyed him. Don't you want someone to like you even when you're not useful? Nathaniel pulled a napkin from the dispenser and wiped her face, a gesture that gave him an excuse not to answer immediately. The truth was complicated, painful. Wrapped up in grief he'd never properly processed, and fear he'd never properly acknowledged. After Sarah died, after the car accident that took her away when Emma was barely 2, Nathaniel had convinced himself that loving people completely was too dangerous. So he dated Caroline for 18 months, a relationship so emotionally sterile it might as well have been a business arrangement. When that imploded, he'd decided love itself was the problem. Being needed was safer than being wanted. Being useful was easier than being vulnerable. But sitting across from his 7-year-old daughter, who somehow understood human connection better than he did, Nathaniel realized he'd been lying to himself. Yeah, he said quietly. I think I do. Emma smiled, satisfied with this answer in the way kids are when adults finally tell them something true. Good. Because you're kind of grumpy when you're alone too much. I'm grumpy all the time. Yeah, but it's worse when you're alone. Maria says you need to get laid. Nathaniel choked on his coffee. She said, what? She didn't say it to me. Emma was laughing now, delighted by his reaction. She said it to her boyfriend on the phone, but I heard it. We're having a conversation about boundaries when we get home. Can we have it after I finish my ice cream? Yes, finish your ice cream. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching students from UT walk past with textbooks and skateboards, and the kind of casual freedom that felt like a foreign language to Nathaniel now. He'd built an empire, made millions, created something from nothing, but he'd forgotten how to be a person. Emma reached across the table and grabbed his hand, her small fingers sticky with chocolate. I love you, Dad. I love you too, sweetheart. Even when you're grumpy. Even when I'm grumpy. On the drive home, Emma fell asleep in her car seat, exhausted from sugar and sunshine and the emotional labor of trying to fix her father's life. Nathaniel carried her inside, put her to bed still in her school clothes because some battles weren't worth fighting, and then stood in his massive kitchen feeling the weight of the silence. His phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. The new hire paperwork is ready. Miss Morales starts Monday. Try not to scare her away in the first week. Nathaniel stared at the message, thinking about dark eyes that saw through his bullshit and a voice that didn't soften its edges to make him comfortable. He didn't respond. Instead, he poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey he didn't really want and stood at the window overlooking downtown Austin, watching lights flicker on in buildings full of people who probably had friends and relationships and lives that weren't built entirely around avoiding feelings. Somewhere out there, Ava Morales was probably eating dollar store ramen in a $600 apartment, grateful for a job she'd had to fight for, completely unaware that she'd already started dismantling everything Nathaniel had built to keep himself safe. He should have hired someone else, someone forgettable, someone who wouldn't look at him like he was just a man instead of a brand, someone who wouldn't make him feel things he'd spent 5 years learning how to suppress. But it was too late now. Monday morning, she'd walk into his office, and nothing would ever be the same. The weekend passed in a blur of Emma's swim lessons, conference calls with Hong Kong investors, and a charity gala Nathaniel attended alone because bringing a date implied interest in human connection, and he'd already hit his quota of vulnerability for the week. Sunday night, he lay awake in his king-size bed, custom mattress, Egyptian cotton sheets, temperature controlled to exactly 68 degrees, and stared at the ceiling, thinking about a woman he'd spoken to for less than 10 minutes. This was ridiculous. He didn't know anything about her except that she was broke, blunt, and completely unimpressed by his money. That wasn't a foundation for anything except professional competence, which was exactly what he needed. The fact that he couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd called him an asshole without flinching meant nothing. The fact that her smile had felt like sunlight breaking through clouds meant nothing. The fact that he'd pulled up her file 3 times over the weekend just to look at her employee photo meant less than nothing. Nathaniel Hayes didn't do feelings anymore. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Monday morning arrived with the kind of aggressive sunshine that made Austin feel like it was personally offended by anyone who wasn't a morning person. Nathaniel got to the office at 6:30, which was late for him, and immediately buried himself in work that didn't require thinking about the new hire starting in 90 minutes. At 7:55, Margaret knocked on his door. "She's early," his assistant said, and there was something in her voice that sounded like approval. "Waiting at my desk. Should I send her in?" "Give me 5 minutes." Margaret nodded and closed the door. Nathaniel stood up, straightened his tie, sat back down, pulled up a random email, then closed it because he wasn't fooling anyone, least of all himself. At exactly 8 a.m., Ava Morales walked into his office wearing the same tired blazer, carrying the same cheap coffee, and looking at him with the same unflinching directness that had derailed his entire weekend. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes." Her voice was professional, neutral, giving away absolutely nothing. Nathaniel gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit. We should go over expectations." She sat. For the next 20 minutes, he outlined her responsibilities, managing his calendar, fielding emails, coordinating with department heads, and generally making sure his day ran smoothly enough that he could focus on actual business instead of administrative chaos. Ava listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a pad she'd pulled from her bag. "Questions?" Nathaniel asked. "Just one." She looked it up from her notes. "Do you actually want an assistant, or do you want someone to blame when things go wrong?" "Excuse me?" "It's a simple question. Margaret mentioned you've cycled through 11 people in 2 years. That's not normal turnover. So either you're hiring incompetent people, which seems unlikely given your company's success, or you're impossible to please. I need to know which one I'm dealing with." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, studying her. "What if it's both? Then I'm wasting my time and should probably update my resume now." "You always this direct? You always this defensive?" The words hung between them like a challenge. Then Nathaniel did something he hadn't done in months. He laughed. Actually laughed. Not the polite chuckle he used in business meetings or the forced smile he gave at charity events, but a real, genuine laugh that surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise Ava. "I'm difficult to work for," he admitted. "I have high standards, I don't tolerate incompetence, and I forget that not everyone lives and breathes this company the way I do. But I'm not impossible, and I don't sabotage people who do good work." Ava nodded slowly. "Okay. I can work with that." "Just like that?" "Just like that." She stood up, smoothing her blazer. "Where's my desk?" "Outside my office. Margaret will show you the systems." He paused, then added, "And Miss Morales?" "Yes? Thank you for being honest." "You're welcome. And you can call me Ava. Miss Morales makes me feel like I'm in trouble with a high school principal." After she left, Nathaniel sat in his office feeling something dangerous stirring in his chest. Interest. Actual, genuine interest in another human being. He tried to smother it immediately. This was professional. She worked for him. End of story. But 3 hours later, when he walked past her desk to grab coffee from the break room, he caught himself glancing at her computer screen to see what she was working on. And when she looked up and caught him staring, instead of looking away like a normal person, he just stood there like an idiot. Need something? Ava asked. Coffee. The break room's that way. She pointed without looking, already back to typing. Nathaniel continued to stand there. Ava stopped typing and turned to face him fully. Mr. Hayes, are you okay? Fine. Just thinking. About coffee? About work? While staring at my desk? I wasn't staring. You were definitely staring. This was absurd. He was a billionaire CEO. He'd negotiated deals with international investors. He'd rebuilt a company from near bankruptcy. He did not get flustered by administrative assistants. I'll be in the break room, he muttered, and walked away with as much dignity as he could salvage, which turned out to be none. Because when he got to the break room and started pouring coffee, he was so busy trying not to think about Ava that he didn't notice the cup was already full until hot liquid was pouring over his hand and onto the marble counter. Shit! He jerked his hand back, coffee spraying across his sleeve and dripping onto the Italian tile that probably cost more per square foot than Ava's monthly rent. And then he heard her voice behind him. If you want to look, you can just ask. Nathaniel turned around. Ava was standing in the doorway, holding a stack of files, wearing an expression that was somewhere between amusement and concern. I wasn't... You were staring at my desk for 30 seconds, she said calmly, setting down the files and grabbing paper towels from the dispenser. Either you're having a stroke or you were staring. And since you made it to the break room under your own power, I'm going with staring. She handed him the paper towels. Their fingers touched. It was brief, meaningless. The kind of incidental contact that happened 1,000 times a day in offices everywhere. But Nathaniel felt it like an electric shock. Thanks, he managed. You're welcome. Ava started cleaning up the spilled coffee with efficient, practiced movements that suggested she'd spent a lot of time cleaning up other people's messes. You should probably change your shirt. Coffee stains are hard to get out. I have a spare in my office. Of course you do. She didn't say it meanly, just matter of fact, like she was cataloging the differences between his world and hers. They cleaned in silence for a minute, Nathaniel acutely aware of how close they were standing, how the break room suddenly felt too small, how her perfume, something simple and floral that probably cost $20 at Target, was more distracting than any expensive scent he'd encountered at galas and fundraisers. Can I ask you something? Ava said, tossing the used paper towels in the trash. Depends on the question. Why did you really hire me? Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who'd been overlooked and underestimated her entire life and was tired of pretending not to notice. Because you're the first person in 2 years who treated me like a human being instead of a paycheck, he said honestly. Ava blinked, clearly not expecting that answer. Oh. And because you were right, I am difficult to work for, but you called me on it instead of just taking it, and I respected that. Respect doesn't pay my rent. The salary does. True. She smiled then, that same real smile that had punched through his defenses during the interview. Well, for what it's worth, I think you're less of an asshole than you pretend to be. Is that supposed to be a compliment? It's an observation. Whether it's a compliment depends on whether you like being an asshole. Before Nathaniel could respond, Margaret's voice came through the intercom on the break room phone. Mr. Hayes, the Singapore call is in 5 minutes. Reality crashed back. He had work. She had work. This moment, whatever it was, needed to end. I should go, he said. You should change your shirt first, unless you want Singapore to think you can't handle a coffee machine. Right, shirt. He walked past her toward the door, then stopped, turned back. Ava? Yeah? Thank you for helping clean up. It's literally my job. No, it's not. You're an administrative assistant, not a janitor. And you're a billionaire, not someone who usually says thank you. I guess we're both full of surprises. Nathaniel left the break room feeling like he'd just survived something he didn't fully understand. Back in his office, he changed into the spare shirt he kept for emergencies, took the Singapore call without retaining anything they discussed, and then sat at his desk staring at nothing while his brain tried to process what was happening. He was attracted to his assistant. No, scratch that. He was interested in his assistant, genuinely interested in her as a person, not just physically attracted, though that was definitely part of it too. This was a disaster. He'd built his entire life around emotional distance, around keeping people at arm's length so they couldn't get close enough to hurt him, around being needed but never needing anyone back. And here was Eva Morales, 3 hours into her first day, casually demolishing 5 years of carefully constructed defenses with nothing more than honesty and a smile. He needed to shut this down. Professional boundaries, appropriate workplace behavior, all the rules he'd never had to enforce before because he'd never been remotely tempted to break them. Margaret appeared in his doorway. How was Singapore? Fine. You agreed to terms they proposed last week that you said were unacceptable. I did? You did. She crossed her arms. What's going on with you? Nothing. I'm fine. You're many things, Nathaniel, but fine isn't one of them. She studied him with the kind of knowing look that made him want to crawl under his desk. This is about her, isn't it? I don't know what you're talking about. Ava, the woman you've been staring at all morning, like she's a puzzle you can't solve. I haven't been staring. You spilled coffee all over yourself because you were too distracted to notice your cup was full. That's either staring or early onset dementia, and I'm betting on staring. Nathaniel ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd broken himself of years ago. It doesn't matter. She works for me. Nothing's going to happen. I didn't say anything was going to happen. You were thinking it. I was thinking that you haven't looked at another human being with actual interest since before Caroline, and maybe that's not the worst thing in the world. Margaret, I know, professional boundaries, workplace ethics, all the rules you live by because living by rules is easier than living by feelings. She walked toward the door, then paused. But maybe ask yourself why you're so afraid of someone who makes you feel something. That might be worth examining. She left before he could argue. Nathaniel spent the rest of the day avoiding the outer office, taking calls from his desk, and generally acting like a coward. At 6 p.m., when most people had already left, he finally emerged to find Ava still at her desk, reviewing what looked like months of backlogged correspondence that his previous assistants had apparently been ignoring. You should go home, he said. She looked up, exhaustion evident in her eyes. I'm almost done. It's your first day. You don't need to prove anything. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to fix the organizational disaster I inherited. She gestured at her computer screen. Did you know you have 17 unanswered requests from journalists? Some of these are from February. I don't do interviews. You should probably tell them that instead of just ignoring them. That's what I hired you for. Ava smiled tiredly. Fair enough. I'll handle it tomorrow. She started shutting down her computer, and Nathaniel found himself not wanting her to leave, which was insane. He'd spent all day avoiding her. How was your first day? He asked. Overwhelming, confusing, slightly terrifying. She grabbed her bag, worn canvas held together with safety pins. But not bad. Margaret's nice, the office is beautiful, and my boss is only moderately difficult instead of catastrophically difficult, so that's a win. Moderate difficulty, I should put that on my business cards. You absolutely should. She stood up, slinging her bag over her shoulder. Same time tomorrow? Same time tomorrow. She walked toward the elevator, and Nathaniel watched her go like an idiot until Margaret appeared at his elbow and said, You're staring again. I'm aware. Good. Self-awareness is the first step toward recovery. Recovery from what? Margaret smiled. You'll figure it out. That night, after picking up Emma from the nanny and reading her 3 chapters of a book about bioluminescent jellyfish, Nathaniel lay in bed staring at a ceiling again. This was just physical attraction, chemical reactions in his brain, pheromones or proximity or whatever biological explanation justified why he couldn't stop thinking about someone he barely knew. It would pass. It had to pass. Because Nathaniel Hayes didn't believe in love anymore. He believed in work, in responsibility, in being useful and needed and safe. Love was dangerous. Love required vulnerability. Love meant giving someone the power to destroy you, and he'd already been destroyed once. He wouldn't survive it again. So tomorrow, he'd be professional, distant. The boss, not the man. Tomorrow, he'd remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea. Tomorrow, he'd stop feeling things he'd sworn never to feel again. But tonight, just for tonight, he let himself imagine what it might be like if he wasn't so broken. If he could be the kind of man who could walk up to a woman like Eva Morales and say something honest and true and brave. If he could be someone worth knowing instead of just someone worth working for. The thought stayed with him until sleep finally came, and even then it followed him into dreams he'd forgotten he was capable of having. Outside his window, Austin glittered like scattered diamonds. And somewhere across the city, in a $600 apartment, Eva Morales was probably thinking about work and rent and survival, all the practical things that consumed her life. She wasn't thinking about her billionaire boss. Why would she? He was just another man in a long line of people who'd underestimated her, used her, or forgotten about her the moment she walked out of a room. But Nathaniel was starting to realize that he didn't want to be just another man. He wanted to be someone she remembered, and that terrified him more than anything had in 5 years. 3 weeks passed before Nathaniel realized he was in serious trouble. Not the kind of trouble that came with failed acquisitions or angry investors. The kind that came from standing outside his own office at 8:15 in the morning, pretending to review emails on his phone while actually waiting to see if Ava would smile at him when she arrived. She did, every single morning. Not a fake smile, not a professional smile, just a quick, genuine acknowledgement that said, "I see you standing there pretending to be busy, and we both know what you're actually doing." It was driving him insane. "You know she can see you through the glass, right?" Margaret said one morning, appearing beside him with coffee that smelled expensive because she had taste, and he paid her enough to indulge it. "You're not subtle. I'm reviewing the Tokyo briefing. You're staring at the elevator like a golden retriever waiting for its owner to come home." Nathaniel shot her a look that would have sent most employees scrambling for cover. Margaret just sipped her coffee, completely unbothered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Nathaniel, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've watched you negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking. I've seen you fire executives without hesitation, and I've never, not once, seen you this rattled by another human being." "I'm not rattled." "You reorganized your entire schedule last week so your meetings would coincide with her lunch break. You're rattled." He wanted to argue. He really did, but Margaret was right, and they both knew it. Over the past 3 weeks, Ava had become essential to his daily functioning in ways that had nothing to do with administrative competence. She'd reorganized his calendar so efficiently that he actually had time to breathe between meetings. She'd fielded journalist requests with responses so perfectly calibrated that 2 of them had actually printed retractions for previous hit pieces. She'd even somehow convinced the head of acquisitions, a man Nathaniel actively disliked, to stop sending passive-aggressive emails at 2 a.m. But more than that, she'd made the office feel different. Less like a sterile monument to corporate success, and more like a place where actual humans worked. She brought cheap coffee every morning in a travel mug covered in stickers from national parks she'd probably never been able to afford to visit. She kept a small succulent on her desk that she'd bought from a gas station, talking to it like it was a person when she thought no one was listening. She hummed while she worked, nothing specific, just random melodies that suggested she was actually content instead of just professionally present. And she never, ever treated Nathaniel like he was special. "The Henderson contract is a mess," she told him last Tuesday, dropping a stack of papers on his desk without ceremony. "Your lawyers wrote it like they were being paid by the word. I highlighted the sections that actually matter." "I don't pay lawyers to be concise," Nathaniel had replied. "I pay them to be thorough. You pay them to make you feel like you're getting your money's worth. There's a difference." She tapped the highlighted sections. "Read these. Ignore the rest. You'll save yourself 3 hours." She'd been right. The contract took 45 minutes instead of 3 hours, and Nathaniel had found himself simultaneously grateful and annoyed that she was better at cutting through bullshit than he was. Now, standing outside his office pretending not to wait for her, he checked his watch. 8:17. She was usually here by 8:15. "She's probably stuck in traffic," Margaret said, reading his mind in that infuriating way she had. "Relax." "I'm perfectly relaxed." "You're checking your watch every 30 seconds. I have a conference call at 8:30. You have a problem." Margaret headed toward her own desk. "And for the record, I like her. Don't screw this up by being weird about it. Before Nathaniel could respond, the elevator doors opened and Ava stepped out, looking harried in a way he'd never seen before. Her blazer was wrinkled, her hair was falling out of its usual neat bun, and she was carrying her coffee mug in one hand and what looked like a car manual in the other. "Morning," she said, breezing past him toward her desk. "Sorry I'm late. My car finally made good on its suicide threats and died in the middle of Lamar Boulevard. Had to wait for a tow truck." Nathaniel followed her. "Are you okay?" "Fine. Just annoyed." She dropped the car manual on her desk with a thud that suggested violence. "That's the third time this month. I think it's staging a rebellion against poverty. Do you need a ride home tonight?" The words were out before he could stop them. Ava looked up, surprised. "What?" "A ride. Home, if your car's in the shop." He was already regretting this. "I could arrange something. A car service." "I can take the bus." "The bus takes 2 hours from here to Riverside. And a car service costs money I don't have. I'm offering to pay for it." Ava set down her coffee very carefully, studying him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Why?" "Because you work for me and you're having car trouble." "So this is a business expense?" "Sure, yes, business expense." "Nathaniel." She said his name quietly, dropping the formal Mr. Hayes she usually used in the office. "I appreciate the offer, I really do, but I can't accept favors from my boss. It gets complicated. It's just a ride." "Nothing's ever just anything with powerful people." She said it without malice, just weary experience. "Trust me, I've learned that the hard way." Before Nathaniel could argue or figure out what the hell he was even arguing for, Margaret appeared with a file folder, and a knowing look that made him want to disappear. "The morning briefing is ready," his assistant said, handing Ava the folder instead of him. "And Nathaniel, you have that conference call in 10 minutes. Might want to prepare instead of hovering." It wasn't a suggestion. Nathaniel retreated to his office, feeling like he'd just failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Through his glass wall, he could see Ava settling into her morning routine, checking emails, returning calls, existing in his space like she belonged there. Which she did, professionally. But Nathaniel was starting to realize that professional was the last thing he wanted from her. The conference call with London investors was a disaster because he couldn't focus. They asked about projected earnings, and he answered questions about market expansion. They wanted clarification on timeline, and he gave them information about staffing. By the time it ended, his CFO was sending concerned emails, and Nathaniel was contemplating whether early-onset dementia was a realistic concern for 32-year-olds. At 11 a.m., Ava knocked on his door. "Come in." She entered carrying a salad in a plastic container that looked homemade, setting it on his desk without asking permission. "What's this?" "Lunch. You haven't eaten yet today." "How do you know that?" "Because I've been working for you for 3 weeks, and you never eat lunch. You drink coffee until 2 p.m. and then wonder why you're irritable." She pushed the container closer. "Eat." Nathaniel stared at the salad like it was a foreign object. "I don't eat salad." "You do now. There's chicken in it. And real bacon, not that fake turkey stuff. Consider it administrative efficiency. You'll think better on actual food. This isn't in your job description. Neither is listening to you butcher conference calls because you're too distracted to function. But here we are." She crossed her arms, waiting. "You listened to my call? The whole office listened to your call. You left your speaker on." Ava's expression softened slightly. "Look, I'm not trying to mother you. I just noticed you have terrible self-care habits and figured someone should mention it before you pass out from caffeine overdose." Nathaniel picked up the fork she'd included, looking at the salad that had clearly been prepared at home because Ava couldn't afford to buy lunch out. She'd made this for him, brought food from her own kitchen to make sure he ate. Something in his chest cracked open. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're welcome. Now eat before it gets warm. Warm salad is depressing." After she left, Nathaniel ate every bite, and it was the best meal he'd had in weeks. That afternoon, he called his head of HR. "I need you to add a transportation stipend to Ava Morales' compensation package," he said without preamble. "That's not standard for administrative positions." "I don't care. Make it happen." "May I ask why?" "No." He hung up before she could argue. 2 hours later, Margaret appeared in his doorway looking concerned. HR just called me. Did you really authorize a $500 monthly transportation stipend for Ava? Yes. Nathaniel, you can't just throw money at people because you're attracted to them. This isn't about attraction. Her car died. She needs reliable transportation to do her job. Her car died this morning and you approved the stipend 10 minutes ago. You didn't even give yourself time to pretend this was a rational business decision. Margaret closed his office door, which meant she was about to say something he wouldn't like. I know you mean well, but this is going to make her uncomfortable. Why? Because accepting money from your boss, even legitimate compensation, creates a power imbalance. She already turns down your offers to help because she doesn't want to owe you anything. This is just a bigger version of the same problem. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, frustrated because Margaret was right, and he hated it. So what am I supposed to do? Let her take the bus for 2 hours each way? Yes, until she decides to accept help on her own terms. Margaret's voice gentled. I know you want to fix things for people. That's what you do. You see a problem and you solve it. But Ava isn't a problem to solve. She's a person who's been taking care of herself for a long time. Respect that. After Margaret left, Nathaniel called HR back and canceled the stipend. It felt wrong. But so did everything else lately. That evening, around 6:30 when most people had gone home, Nathaniel found Ava still at her desk, researching bus routes on her computer. You should have left an hour ago, he said. She didn't look up. So should you. I own the company. I'm allowed to work late. And I'm trying to figure out if taking the 17 bus to the 8 bus is faster than taking the 20 to the 15. She finally looked at him, exhaustion evident in her eyes. Public transportation is its own special hell. Nathaniel made a decision that was probably stupid but felt necessary. I'll drive you. Nathaniel, not as your boss, as someone who's leaving anyway and going in the same direction. You live in Westlake, I live in Riverside. That's not the same direction. It's the same city. Ava studied him for a long moment, and Nathaniel could see her weighing options, calculating risks, trying to figure out if accepting help would cost her more than refusing it. Finally, she sighed. Okay, but just tonight, and you're not coming upstairs. I wouldn't dream of it. They took his Range Rover because the Aston Martin seemed aggressively inappropriate for the situation. Ava gave him directions in short, efficient bursts, staring out the window at the city passing by. You don't have to do this, she said after 10 minutes of silence. I know. So why are you? Nathaniel gripped the steering wheel tighter. Because Margaret made me cancel the transportation stipend I tried to add to your salary, and I felt guilty. That made Ava laugh, a real laugh that filled the car with warmth. You tried to give me a transportation stipend? Is that funny? It's very you. See problem, throw money at it, hope it goes away. She was still smiling. For what it's worth, I appreciate the thought, but Margaret was right to make you cancel it. Why? Because I don't want your charity, Nathaniel. I want to earn what I have. A transportation stipend isn't charity. It's compensation. Only if everyone at my level gets it. Otherwise, it's special treatment, and special treatment always comes with strings. She turned to look at him. I've been poor my whole life. You know what I've learned? Rich people don't give poor people money for free. They give it to feel good about themselves, or because they want something, or because it makes them feel powerful. And I'm done being someone's charity case. The words stung because they were true. Nathaniel had wanted to help her, but he'd also wanted to be the person who helped her, wanted to feel useful, wanted to matter in her life in a way that had nothing to do with being her boss. I don't think you're a charity case, he said quietly. Then what do you think I am? It was a dangerous question with 1,000 wrong answers and maybe one right one that he wasn't brave enough to say. I think you're someone who deserves better than a car that breaks down and a 2-hour bus commute and dollar store ramen for dinner. That's just a nice way of saying you pity me. No, it's a way of saying I respect you enough to be honest about the fact that life's been unfair to you. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Turn left here. My building's the one with the broken fence. Nathaniel pulled up to a building that made his heart hurt. Cracked stucco. Barred windows. A parking lot full of cars that looked like they were held together with duct tape and prayer. This was where she lived. This was where she went every night after working in his glass tower with its marble floors and original artwork. Thanks for the ride, Ava said, unbuckling her seatbelt. Ava, don't. She looked at him with something like sadness. Don't look at my building like it's a tragedy. This is my life. I'm not ashamed of it. I didn't mean, yes, you did. You looked at my apartment the same way everyone with money looks at poor people, like we're something broken that needs fixing. She grabbed her bag. I'll figure out the bus situation. You don't need to worry about me. She was out of the car before he could respond. Nathaniel sat in his Range Rover watching her walk into that building and felt like the world's biggest asshole. He'd wanted to help. Instead, he'd made her feel small. The drive back to Westlake took 20 minutes and felt like punishment. His house, mansion really, looked obscene after seeing where Ava lived. 14,000 square feet for 2 people. A pool no one used. Rooms he'd never even entered. Emma was already asleep when he got home, exhausted from swim practice, according to Maria. Nathaniel stood in his daughter's doorway watching her breathe, this small, perfect person who depended on him to not screw up too badly, and wondered what the hell he was doing. He couldn't stop thinking about Ava. But he couldn't help her without making her feel patronized. He couldn't be honest about his feelings without crossing professional boundaries. He couldn't keep pretending he didn't care without lying to himself and everyone around him. He was trapped in a situation of his own making, and the worst part was knowing that Ava was right. He'd looked at her building like it was a tragedy because he'd been taught his whole life that poverty was something shameful instead of just a circumstance people found themselves in through no fault of their own. The next morning, Nathaniel arrived at the office before 6 a.m., buried himself in work, and tried to pretend nothing had changed. Ava showed up at 8:15 looking tired but professional, and if she was bothered by last night's conversation, she didn't show it. "Morning," she said, dropping her bag at her desk. "Morning." That was it. No smile, no warmth, just professional acknowledgement. It stayed that way for 3 days. 3 days of polite distance and careful boundaries, and Nathaniel slowly realizing that he'd ruined something he hadn't even known he had. On the 4th day, Emma came to visit the office. It wasn't planned. Maria had a family emergency, and Emma's school had a half day, and Nathaniel's carefully constructed systems of delegation all failed simultaneously, leaving him with a 7-year-old in his corporate headquarters at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday. "This is so cool!" Emma spun in circles in his office, taking in the view and the furniture and the general excess of it all. "Do you work here every day?" "Every day." "That must be boring." "It's work. It's supposed to be boring." Emma stopped spinning to give him a look that suggested she thought he was being deliberately dense. "Work doesn't have to be boring. Maria says if you love what you do, it doesn't feel like work." Maria says a lot of things, and she's right about most of them. Emma wandered over to the window. "Can I meet your assistant? Margaret says she's nice." "When did you talk to Margaret?" "She called to make sure I was okay when I got here, because she's nice and you're paranoid." Before Nathaniel could argue, Emma had already opened his office door and marched directly to Ava's desk. "Hi, I'm Emma. Are you my dad's assistant?" Ava looked up from her computer, surprise shifting to warmth so naturally that Nathaniel felt something tighten in his chest. "I am. It's nice to meet you, Emma." "You're pretty. Are you single?" "Emma!" Nathaniel appeared at his office door, mortified. Ava was trying not to laugh. "That's a very direct question." "My dad says direct questions get direct answers, so are you?" "I am single, yes." "Good, because my dad's single too, and he's really lonely even though he pretends he's not." Nathaniel wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "Emma, we talked about boundaries." "You talked about boundaries. I just nodded." Emma turned back to Ava, completely unbothered by her father's distress. "Do you like kids?" "I do, actually." "Do you like marine biology?" "I don't know much about it." "I could teach you. I know everything about bioluminescent jellyfish." Ava smiled, that real smile Nathaniel hadn't seen in 4 days. "I'd like that." They talked for 20 minutes about jellyfish and ocean currents and whether octopuses were actually aliens. Ava listened like Emma's 7-year-old marine biology lecture was the most important thing she'd heard all week, asking questions that proved she was actually paying attention instead of just being polite. And Nathaniel stood there watching them, his daughter and his assistant, and felt something he hadn't felt since Sarah died. Hope. Dangerous, terrifying hope that maybe his life didn't have to be defined by loss and distance and emotional unavailability. "She's great," Ava said quietly, after Emma got distracted by Margaret's offer to show her the executive break room. "You've done a good job with her." "I've mostly just tried not to screw her up too badly." "That's what parenting is, controlled screwing up." Ava hesitated, then added, "I'm sorry about the other night. In the car, I was defensive." "You had every right to be defensive. I was being condescending." "You were being human. Humans react to things." She met his eyes. "I'm not used to people actually caring about my situation without wanting something in return. It made me uncomfortable." "I don't want anything from you, Ava." The lie felt bitter on his tongue because it wasn't true. He wanted everything from her: her time, her attention, her smile, her thoughts, her presence in his life, in ways that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with the fact that she made him feel like a person instead of a role. But he couldn't say any of that. So he stood there like a coward while the truth hung between them, unspoken. "I should get back to work," Ava said finally. "Yeah, me too." That night, after dropping Emma off at home and enduring her 20-minute analysis of why Ava was perfect for him, Nathaniel made a decision. He needed to get his life under control, which meant creating distance between himself and Ava before he did something stupid that would ruin her career and his carefully maintained emotional equilibrium. Starting tomorrow, he'd be professional, distant, the boss she needed instead of the man he wanted to be. It lasted exactly 6 hours. Because the next morning, Ava showed up to work with homemade breakfast tacos wrapped in foil, setting one on his desk without ceremony before heading to her own station. Nathaniel unwrapped it slowly, finding perfectly scrambled eggs, cheese, salsa, and a note written on a napkin. "You still don't eat enough. This one's got bacon. You're welcome." He sat in his expensive office, eating a breakfast taco his assistant had made in her $600 apartment, and realized that every wall he'd built to keep people out was completely useless against someone who just quietly walked through them like they didn't exist. Ava Morales was going to destroy him. And the terrifying part was that he was starting to think he might let her. The breakfast tacos became a routine Nathaniel didn't deserve but couldn't bring himself to stop. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Ava showed up with food she'd made in her tiny apartment kitchen, wrapped in foil like gifts he hadn't asked for but desperately needed. He tried paying her back once. She'd looked at the $50 bill he'd left on her desk like it was an insult, picked it up between 2 fingers, and dropped it in his coffee mug. "Don't do that again," she'd said quietly. He hadn't. Instead, he started leaving her things that weren't money: a book about marine biology he'd found at a used bookstore, a coffee mug from a fancy shop that didn't look like it was held together with spite and determination, a succulent that matched the one on her desk, because he'd noticed hers was dying and thought maybe it needed a friend. She never said thank you. But the book appeared on her desk with sticky notes marking pages she'd read. The mug became her new daily carrier. The succulent sat next to its dying companion like a tiny green bodyguard. And Nathaniel told himself this was normal, professional, the kind of thing colleagues did for each other. Margaret saw right through it. "You're courting her," his assistant said one afternoon, appearing in his doorway with that look that meant she was about to ruin his carefully maintained denial. "I'm being collegial. You bought her a succulent. She likes plants." "Nathaniel, you don't even know what a succulent is. I watched you Google it." He had no defense for that. The truth was, he'd spent 2 weeks learning everything about Ava Morales that he could observe without being creepy. She drank her coffee black with exactly 1 sugar. She hummed when she was concentrating, usually off-key. She was left-handed but used her mouse with her right hand, which meant she'd probably been forced to adapt in a world built for right-handed people. She touched her collarbone when she was nervous, a gesture so subtle most people wouldn't notice. Nathaniel noticed everything. And he was starting to realize that noticing everything about someone meant you were already in too deep to pretend otherwise. The breaking point came on a Wednesday morning in late October. Nathaniel arrived at the office at his usual 6:30 to find Ava already at her desk, which was unusual because she normally showed up at 8:15 with military precision. She was staring at her computer screen with an expression he'd never seen before. Not tired, not frustrated, but something harder, angrier. "You're here early," he said. She didn't respond. Nathaniel walked closer, concern overriding his usual careful distance. Ava, I need to tell you something. Her voice was flat, controlled in a way that suggested she was holding something volcanic just beneath the surface. And I need you to not fire me for it. What happened? My ex-boyfriend is coming here. The words hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. What? Marcus. We dated for 2 years in Seattle. He's the reason I left. Ava finally looked at him, and the pain in her eyes made Nathaniel want to break something. He called me last night, said he's in Austin for business and wants to talk. I told him no, multiple times, but he just texted that he's coming to my office at 10 a.m. whether I want him to or not. Nathaniel's hands clenched into fists. That's harassment. That's Marcus. He doesn't take no for an answer. Never has. She looked back at her computer. I'm telling you because I don't want you to be blindsided when some guy shows up demanding to see me. And because if I handle this badly, I don't want it to reflect on the company. Ava, Nathaniel waited until she looked at him again. You're not getting fired, and you're not handling this alone. I can take care of myself. I know you can, but you don't have to. Something shifted in her expression, surprise mixed with something that might have been relief. You'd really back me up? Without question. They stared at each other for a long moment, and Nathaniel felt something fundamental change between them. An understanding that went beyond professional courtesy into something more honest and dangerous. Then Ava's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her jaw tightened. He's in the lobby. Nathaniel checked his watch, 9:15. He's 45 minutes early. He does that, shows up uninvited and early so you can't prepare. Ava stood up, smoothing her blazer in a gesture that looked like armor. I'll go down and deal with this. No. Nathaniel, tell security to send him up to the 43rd floor. We'll handle this here. When she started to argue, he added, You said you didn't want this to reflect badly on the company. Having a confrontation in the lobby where clients can see is worse than having one in a private office. She considered this, then nodded. Okay, but I don't need you to fight my battles. I know. I'm just standing beside you while you fight them yourself. The look she gave him then was worth every confused feeling he'd been trying to suppress for the past 6 weeks. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened and a man stepped out who made Nathaniel's instincts scream danger in ways that had nothing to do with physical threat and everything to do with emotional manipulation. Marcus was handsome in that carefully cultivated way that suggested he spent a lot of time thinking about his appearance. Expensive haircut, designer suit that probably cost more than Ava made in a month, and the kind of confident smile that said he'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was also carrying a box. Ava. Marcus's voice was smooth, practiced. You look good. Austin's treating you well. Ava stood up from her desk, her posture rigid. What are you doing here, Marcus? I told you. I wanted to talk. He set the box down on her desk without asking permission. I brought some of your things, stuff you left behind. I didn't leave anything behind. I took everything that mattered. Well, I found these and thought you might want them. Marcus finally seemed to notice Nathaniel standing in his office doorway. Who's this? New boyfriend? My boss. Ava's voice could have cut glass. Nathaniel Hayes, this is Marcus Chen. Marcus, you have 5 minutes to say whatever you came to say, and then you're leaving. Marcus's smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Still so defensive. I came all this way to see you, and this is the reception I get? You came uninvited after I explicitly told you not to. Because I knew you didn't mean it. You always say things you don't mean when you're upset. He reached for her hand. Ava stepped back. Don't touch me. Baby, come on, can we talk, privately? Marcus shot Nathaniel a look that was clearly meant to dismiss him. Nathaniel didn't move. Anything you need to say, you can say here, Ava said. Marcus sighed, going for wounded instead of angry. Fine. I'll say it here. I made a mistake. Letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life, and I want you back. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nathaniel watched Ava's face carefully, looking for any sign that she was affected by this, but her expression remained neutral, controlled, revealing nothing. You didn't let me go, she said finally. I left. There's a difference. Semantics. The point is we were good together. You know we were. We were terrible together. You controlled where I went, who I talked to, how I spent my money. You criticized everything I did and made me feel like I was never good enough. I was trying to help you improve yourself. By telling me I dress cheap, by suggesting I lose weight, by monitoring my phone because you said you were worried about me? Ava's voice was rising now, years of suppressed anger finally finding air. That's not help, Marcus. That's abuse. Marcus's mask slipped for just a second, showing something ugly underneath. Then it snapped back into place, smooth and reasonable. You're being dramatic. I cared about you. I still care about you. That's why I'm here. You're here because you can't handle the fact that I left, that I chose myself over you, that I'd rather be broken alone in a city where I don't know anyone than spend another second being diminished by you. Ava, we're done, Marcus. We've been done for a year. Go back to Seattle and leave me alone. Marcus's jaw tightened. You think you're better off here, working some admin job for some rich asshole who probably doesn't even see you as a person? That's when Nathaniel stepped forward. He didn't say anything, didn't threaten or posture, just moved to stand beside Ava, a silent statement that Marcus could interpret however he wanted. Marcus looked between them, and understanding dawned on his face. Oh, I see. You moved on fast. There's nothing to move on from, Ava said, but there was a tremor in her voice now, fatigue bleeding through the anger. Right, sure. Marcus picked up his box with exaggerated care. Well, when this doesn't work out, and it won't, because guys like him don't end up with girls like you, don't come crying to me. I wouldn't dream of it. Marcus headed toward the elevator, then turned back. You know what your problem is, Ava. You're so busy trying to prove you don't need anyone that you can't see when someone's actually trying to love you. The elevator doors closed on his smug face. The silence that followed felt like the aftermath of a bomb. Ava stood perfectly still for a long moment. Then she walked into the break room without a word. Nathaniel followed, ignoring Margaret's concerned look. He found Ava standing at the window, staring out at the Austin skyline with her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold something together. Are you okay? He asked quietly. I'm fine. Ava, I said I'm fine. But her voice cracked on the word, betraying her. Nathaniel moved closer, careful not to crowd her. You don't have to be fine. That was humiliating, pathetic, a reminder that my taste in men is apparently garbage. She laughed bitterly. Take your pick. I was going to say hard. That was hard, and you handled it with more grace than most people could manage. Ava turned to look at him, and there were tears in her eyes that she was clearly refusing to let fall. You want to know the worst part? He's not entirely wrong. I do push people away. I do have walls, because every time I've let someone in, they've used it against me. Not everyone will. How do you know? Because I've been watching you for 6 weeks, and I've seen the way you take care of people without expecting anything back. The way you listen to Emma talk about jellyfish like it's the most important thing in the world. The way you made me breakfast tacos because you noticed I don't eat enough. Nathaniel took a breath, stepping closer to the edge of honesty than he'd been since Sarah died. You're not the problem, Ava. The people who made you feel like you were, they're the problem. A tear escaped, sliding down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. Why are you being so nice to me? Because you deserve nice. You don't know me well enough to know what I deserve. Then let me get to know you better. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Ava stared at him, searching his face for something. Nathaniel, you're my boss. I know. And you're a billionaire with a daughter and a dead wife and probably 1,000 reasons why this is a terrible idea. I know that too. So why? Her voice broke. Why are you looking at me like that? Like what? Like I matter. Nathaniel's heart cracked open. Because you do matter. You've mattered since the day you walked into my office and called me an asshole. You've mattered every morning when you show up with cheap coffee and real smiles. You've mattered every single moment I've spent trying to convince myself I don't feel what I feel. And what do you feel? It was the most dangerous question she could have asked. Nathaniel could lie. Retreat behind professionalism and appropriate boundaries and all the rules he'd built his life around. Or he could tell the truth. I feel like I've been walking around half alive for 5 years, and you woke up the parts of me I thought were dead, he said quietly. I feel like every wall I built to keep people out is completely useless against someone who just walks through them like they don't exist. I feel terrified and hopeful and completely out of control, and I haven't felt any of those things since before my wife died. Ava's breath hitched. Nathaniel, you don't have to say anything. I know this is complicated. I know I'm your boss, and that creates a power imbalance, and that you probably think I'm just another rich guy who wants something from you. But I needed you to know that you matter, not because you work for me, because you're you. For a long moment, Ava just stared at him. Then she did something unexpected. She laughed, not a bitter laugh, not a sad laugh, a real laugh that filled the break room with something that felt dangerously close to joy. What? Nathaniel asked, confused. You? She shook her head, smiling through tears. You're standing here giving me this whole emotional confession, and you look absolutely terrified. I am terrified. Good. That makes two of us. She wiped her eyes again, composing herself. For the record, I've been trying not to have feelings for you since approximately week 2. It's been going terribly. Nathaniel's heart stopped. What? You heard me. I have feelings. For you. My billionaire boss who buys me books and succulents and looks at me like I'm something precious instead of something broken. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them. But I need you to understand something. I don't want to be rescued. I don't want to be fixed. I don't want to be anyone's project or charity case or emotional band-aid. I don't want any of those things either. Then what do you want? Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the tear-stained face and defensive posture and the courage it must have taken to admit she had feelings after everything Marcus had just put her through. I want to know what you're like when you're not at work, he said honestly. I want to hear about your life before Austin. I want to know why you left Seattle and what you're running from and what you're running toward. I want to take you to dinner somewhere that doesn't cost a month of your rent. I want to introduce you to Emma properly, not just in passing. He stopped, overwhelmed by how much he wanted. I want to see if this thing between us is real, or if I'm just projecting my loneliness onto the first person who's been kind to me in years. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Coffee. What? Take me to coffee. Not dinner. Coffee. She held up a hand before he could argue. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, we're doing it slowly. No grand gestures. No expensive restaurants. No throwing money at problems. Just coffee and conversation and figuring out if we actually like each other outside of this office. I already know I like you outside of this office. You think you do. But you've only seen work Ava. Professional Ava. The version of me that's trying to keep a job and not screw up her life more than it already is screwed up. She crossed her arms, but there was vulnerability in her eyes. What if real Ava is disappointing? What if I'm boring or damaged or too much work? What if you're not? What if I am? Nathaniel stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her brown eyes, close enough to smell her cheap floral perfume, close enough to touch her if he was brave enough. Then I'll deal with it, he said, because disappointing and boring and damaged still sounds better than the alternative. Which is? Never knowing what we could have been. Ava studied his face for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay, coffee. Tomorrow. After work. Somewhere normal where billionaires don't usually go. I don't know where normal people get coffee. I'll show you. She smiled, and it transformed her entire face. And Nathaniel, thank you for standing beside me today, for not trying to take control or fight my battles or make me feel weak for needing support. Most powerful men don't know how to do that. I'm not most men. No, you're really not. They stood there in the break room, surrounded by cheap coffee makers and corporate motivational posters, and Nathaniel felt something shift in his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope, mixed with terror, mixed with the kind of wanting that couldn't be rationalized away. Margaret appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and immediately retreated with a knowing smile. I should get back to work, Ava said, but she didn't move. Me too. Neither did Nathaniel. People are going to talk if we both disappear into the break room for 20 minutes. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You own the company. I'm the admin who'll get labeled as sleeping her way to job security. The reminder of their power imbalance was sobering. Nathaniel stepped back, creating professional distance even though everything in him wanted to close it instead. You're right. I'm sorry. Don't apologize. Just be aware. Ava headed toward the door, then paused. And for the record, I don't care what people say. I care what's true. And the truth is, I earned this job before I had feelings for you. Anyone who suggests otherwise can fight me. After she left, Nathaniel stood in the break room feeling like he'd just survived something monumental. Marcus had shown up trying to reclaim something he'd never deserved in the first place. And instead of breaking Ava down, he'd inadvertently forced both of them to be honest about what was happening between them. Nathaniel pulled out his phone and texted Emma's nanny, "Can you stay late tomorrow? I have plans after work." Maria responded immediately. "Does this have anything to do with the pretty assistant Emma won't stop talking about?" Nathaniel didn't answer, but when he went back to his office, he caught himself smiling at nothing, and Margaret noticed. "Well," his assistant said, appearing with a folder that probably didn't need immediate attention. "Well, what? Are you going to tell me what happened in there, or do I have to use my imagination?" "Use your imagination." "Nathaniel, I've worked for you for 6 years. I've never seen you smile like that." "I'm not smiling." "You're absolutely smiling. It's unnerving." Margaret set down the folder. "So is this happening? Are you two actually doing this?" "We're getting coffee." "That's it? Coffee? That's it?" Margaret studied him with an expression that was part approval, part concern. "Be careful with her. She's not like the women you usually date." "I know." "No, I don't think you do." Margaret's voice softened. "The women you usually date, they have safety nets, family money, connections, options. Ava doesn't have any of that. If this goes wrong, she loses her job, her income, her stability. So if you're not serious about this, if this is just you being lonely and projecting onto someone who's nice to you, end it now before you hurt her." The words hit hard because they were exactly what Nathaniel had been afraid of. "I don't want to hurt her." "Then don't. And that means being honest with yourself about what you actually want and whether you're capable of giving it to her." After Margaret left, Nathaniel sat at his desk trying to answer that question. What did he want? He wanted Ava. That much was obvious. But did he want her enough to risk the comfortable emotional distance he'd maintained for 5 years? Did he want her enough to let someone see all the broken, damaged parts of him that he'd hidden from everyone except Emma? Did he want her enough to be vulnerable again, knowing that vulnerability meant giving someone the power to destroy him? His phone buzzed. A text from Ava. "Stop overthinking. I can hear you spiraling from here." Despite everything, he smiled. "How do you know I'm overthinking? Because you've been staring at your computer screen for 10 minutes without typing anything. And because I'm overthinking too. We're a mess. A mess seems optimistic. It's all I've got right now." Nathaniel looked through his office glass at Ava's desk, where she was typing something with her usual focused intensity. She glanced up, caught him staring, and raised an eyebrow. He raised one back. She smiled. And Nathaniel realized that Margaret was right. He needed to be sure about this. Because Ava deserved someone who was all in, not someone who was hedging bets and protecting himself. The question was whether Nathaniel Hayes, billionaire widower and emotional disaster, was capable of being that person. He had approximately 24 hours to figure it out. Nathaniel spent that entire night awake, staring at his ceiling and mentally rehearsing conversations that would probably sound nothing like reality. By 4 a.m., he'd convinced himself this was a terrible idea at least 7 times. By 5, he'd talked himself back into it. By 6, when Emma wandered into his room asking why he looked like a zombie, he'd given up on sleep entirely. "Are you sick?" his daughter asked, climbing onto his bed with the casual invasiveness of children who didn't understand personal boundaries. "Just didn't sleep well." "Because you're nervous about your date?" Nathaniel sat up. "How do you know about that?" "Maria told me. She said you're finally doing something normal for once." Emma settled against his pillows like she planned to stay. "Is it with Ava?" "It's just coffee." "That's a date." "It's coffee." "Dad, I'm 7, not stupid. Coffee with someone you like is a date." She studied him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Are you going to mess this up?" "Probably." "That's honest." Emma seemed to appreciate this. "Want some advice?" "From a 7-year-old? From someone who knows you better than you know yourself." She didn't wait for permission. Don't try to impress her. She already knows you're rich and it doesn't matter to her. Just be yourself. The version of yourself you are with me when you're not being weird and corporate. Nathaniel pulled his daughter into a hug, pressing a kiss to her hair. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't usually listen. She squirmed free. Can I meet her properly sometime? Like, not at your office where you're being all professional and weird? Maybe, if this goes well. It'll go well if you don't overthink it. Emma hopped off the bed. Now get dressed. You look terrible, and you need to not look terrible for at least 8 more hours. After she left, Nathaniel showered, dressed, and headed to the office with the kind of nervous energy he hadn't felt since his first major acquisition, except that deal had involved $50 million and hundreds of jobs. This was just coffee that felt like it carried the weight of his entire future. He arrived at the office at 7, which gave him 90 minutes to pretend to work before Ava showed up. Margaret took one look at him and brought coffee without being asked. You look awful, she said. Good morning to you too. Did you sleep? Not really. Nervous? Terrified. Margaret smiled in a way that was almost maternal. Good. That means you care. Just don't let the fear make you act like an idiot. Very helpful, thank you. You're welcome. She headed toward the door, then paused. And Nathaniel? She's nervous too. Ava came in 30 minutes early and has reorganized her desk 3 times already. Whatever you're feeling, she's feeling it too. After Margaret left, Nathaniel stood at his window watching the city wake up, trying to calm the anxiety spiraling through his chest. This was absurd. He'd negotiated with international investors. He'd rebuilt a dying company. He'd survived his wife's death and single parenthood and a relationship so cold it had nearly convinced him he was incapable of feeling anything. He could handle coffee with a woman he liked. At 8:15 exactly, Ava appeared at her desk wearing the same tired blazer and carrying the same cheap coffee, but there was something different about her today, a tension in her shoulders that suggested she'd slept about as well as he had. Their eyes met through the glass. She gave him a small, nervous smile. He returned it, and somehow that helped. The day crawled by with the speed of continental drift. Every meeting felt endless. Every email demanded attention he couldn't give. By 3 p.m., Nathaniel had accomplished almost nothing except watching the clock like it personally offended him. At 5:30, Ava knocked on his door. Ready? She asked. No. Yes. They took separate cars because showing up together seemed too presumptuous, meeting at a coffee shop on South Congress that Ava had chosen specifically because it was aggressively normal and not the kind of place billionaires usually go. She was right. The place was crowded with UT students, local artists, and people who looked like they'd never heard of Nathaniel Hayes and wouldn't care if they had. The furniture was mismatched. The art on the walls was clearly done by locals. The whole place smelled like coffee and something baking that made Nathaniel's stomach remind him he'd forgotten to eat lunch. Ava was already there when he arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. I got you black with 1 sugar, she said as he sat down. That's how you take it, right? How did you know that? I've been making your coffee for 6 weeks, Nathaniel. I pay attention. She wrapped her hands around her own cup. This is weird, right? This is definitely weird. Extremely weird. Okay, good. Not just me then. She took a breath. So, ground rules. No talking about work. No talking about money. And if either of us wants to bail, we can just say so without the other person getting weird about it. Fair enough. Nathaniel sipped his coffee, which was surprisingly good. So what do we talk about? I don't know. Normal people things? Ava laughed nervously. This is where I admit I'm terrible at dating. I haven't actually been on a real date in over a year. This is where I admit I haven't been on a date since my wife died. Unless you count the 18 months with Caroline, which I don't because that was more like a mutual hostage situation. That bad? She once gave me a color-coded spreadsheet of activities we should do together to optimize our relationship compatibility. Ava choked on her coffee. She did not. She absolutely did. It included scheduled sex on Wednesdays and Saturdays. What happened to spontaneity? Caroline thought spontaneity was inefficient emotional labor. Nathaniel shook his head. I stayed because I thought that's what responsible adults did. Turned out I was just avoiding feelings by dating someone who didn't require them. That's depressingly self-aware. I've had a lot of therapy. He studied her over his coffee cup. What about you? How'd you end up with Marcus? Ava's expression darkened. I was 23 and broke, and he seemed stable. He had a good job, nice apartment, plans for the future. I thought that's what I needed, someone who had their life together because mine was falling apart. What was falling apart? Everything. My mom died when I was 22, lung cancer. I'd been taking care of her for 2 years, working 3 jobs to cover medical bills that insurance wouldn't. When she died, I had nothing. No family, no savings, just debt and grief, and this apartment in Seattle I couldn't afford. She stared into her coffee. Marcus showed up at the restaurant where I was waitressing. He was nice, attentive, said all the right things. By the time I realized he was controlling and manipulative, I was already isolated from the few friends I had left. How'd you get out? I saved money secretly for 8 months. Told him I was working overtime when I was actually picking up extra shifts and hiding cash in a bank account he didn't know about. Then one day while he was at work, I packed everything I could fit in my car and left. Drove straight here because it was far enough away that he couldn't just show up on my doorstep. She met his eyes. Until yesterday, apparently, Nathaniel wanted to say something comforting, but nothing felt adequate. So instead he said, "You're braver than you give yourself credit for." I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being scared. Those aren't mutually exclusive. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching people come and go, existing in this bubble, where they were just 2 people having coffee instead of a billionaire, and his assistant navigating a complicated power dynamic. Then Ava asked the question Nathaniel had been dreading. Tell me about your wife. His first instinct was to deflect, change the subject, retreat behind the walls he'd built to keep this particular grief contained. But Ava had been honest with him. She deserved the same. Sarah, he said quietly, we met in college. She was studying architecture and I was pretending to care about business school, while actually spending most of my time trying to impress her. We got married 2 years after graduation, had Emma a year later. And for a while everything was perfect in that way. Things are perfect before life reminds you nothing stays that way. What happened? Car accident. Some drunk driver ran a red light. She was coming home from a client meeting. Emma was too. Nathaniel gripped his coffee cup tighter. I was supposed to pick up dinner that night, but I was working late on some deal that seemed important at the time, and I asked Sarah to grab takeout instead. If I just left the office 30 minutes earlier, she wouldn't have been at that intersection at that exact moment. Nathaniel, Ava's voice was gentle. You know that's not your fault, right? Logically, yes. Emotionally? He shook his head. I spent 2 years in therapy learning how to not blame myself. Most days I succeed, but sometimes I still wonder what would have happened if I'd just left work early, like a normal person, instead of being so obsessed with building something that didn't matter as much as I thought it did. Is that why you work so much now? Penance? The word struck something true. Maybe. Or maybe I just don't know how to be a person without work giving me structure. After Sarah died, the company was the only thing that made sense. Contracts, negotiations, acquisitions, they all had rules. Grief didn't. Parenting didn't. So I threw myself into the one thing I could control. And then Caroline showed up. Nathaniel agreed. She was a colleague's friend, recently divorced. We had dinner a few times, and it just kind of became a thing without either of us actually deciding it should be a thing. Looking back, I think we were both using each other to avoid dealing with our actual problems. She wanted stability after a messy divorce. I wanted companionship without emotional risk. What ended it? Emma, actually. She was 6, and she asked me why Caroline never looked happy to see her. I didn't have a good answer. Turns out when your 6-year-old can identify that your relationship is hollow, it's probably time to end it. He smiled despite himself. Emma's eerily perceptive about people. She's great. The jellyfish lecture was genuinely fascinating. She'd do it again if you let her, probably with visual aids this time. Ava laughed, and the sound made something warm unfold in Nathaniel's chest. I'd actually like that. I didn't know half that stuff about bioluminescence. They talked for 2 hours. About Emma's obsession with marine biology despite living nowhere near an ocean. About Ava's mother, who'd been a nurse and taught her daughter that kindness didn't cost anything but meant everything. About Nathaniel's parents, who were still alive but emotionally distant in that way wealthy people often were. About Ava's childhood moving between different cities as her mom chased better-paying jobs. About books they'd read and movies they'd loved, and the strange parallel of both being people who'd built walls around themselves because letting people in had hurt too much. By the time they left the coffee shop, the sun was setting, and Nathaniel realized he hadn't thought about work once in 2 hours. They stood outside on the sidewalk, the awkwardness of ending returning full force. "So," Ava said, "that wasn't terrible." High praise. "I mean, it was good, better than good. I just don't know how to end a date that's not actually a date without being weird about it." Nathaniel smiled. "Want to walk? There's a park a few blocks from here. Trying to extend the not date?" "Absolutely." "Okay, but I need to warn you. I'm a slow walker. I like to actually look at things instead of just rushing past them." "I can handle slow." They walked through downtown Austin as the city shifted from day to evening, past food trucks and street musicians and murals painted on buildings that probably violated some zoning law. Ava stopped to read every historical marker, to watch a street artist create portraits in chalk, to admire a dog that was clearly part husky and part chaos. And Nathaniel watched her experience the city like someone who'd never taken any of it for granted, who saw beauty in ordinary things because she'd spent so long with so little that ordinary felt extraordinary. They ended up at a small courtyard between two buildings, tucked away from the main street, where two olive trees grew impossibly from concrete, and someone had installed a bench that looked like it had been stolen from a park and repurposed. Ava sat down with a sigh that suggested her feet hurt. "This is nice?" Nathaniel sat beside her, maintaining careful distance. "It is. Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "What do you actually want from this?" Ava turned to face him. "From me. From us. Whatever this is." It was the second time she'd asked him a version of that question, and Nathaniel realized he still didn't have a good answer. Or rather, he had an answer that terrified him too much to say out loud. But she'd been honest with him about Marcus, about her mother, about every hard thing that had shaped her into the person sitting beside him. She deserved the same honesty. "I want to know what it's like to feel something again," he said quietly. "Real something. Not obligation or responsibility or the careful performance of appropriate emotions. I want to wake up excited to see you instead of dreading another day of going through motions. I want to introduce you to Emma, not as my assistant, but as someone who matters to me. I want to stop being so careful all the time, because being careful means being alone, and I'm tired of being alone." Ava's breath caught. "Nathaniel, I know it's complicated. I know I'm your boss, and that creates problems. I know you have every reason not to trust powerful men who say pretty things. I know I'm probably damaged in ways that therapy hasn't fixed, and I know I come with baggage that includes a 7-year-old and dead wife, and emotional unavailability I'm still working through." He turned to face her fully. "But I also know that you make me want to try, to be better, to risk being hurt again because the alternative is staying safe and empty and half alive." Oh, my. The silence that followed felt infinite. Then Ava said, "I'm tired of being careful too." "Yeah? Yeah?" She moved closer, closing some of the distance between them. "I'm tired of protecting myself from people who might hurt me by never letting anyone close enough to matter. I'm tired of pretending I don't have feelings because feelings make me vulnerable. I'm tired of working 3 times as hard as everyone else just to prove I deserve to exist in spaces people think I don't belong. You belong everywhere you choose to be." See, that's the thing. You say stuff like that and you mean it. You look at me like I'm not broken or damaged or too much work. You stand beside me when my ex shows up instead of trying to fix everything or taking over. You remember how I take my coffee and you buy me books about jellyfish and you make your daughter laugh even though you're terrified of screwing up as a parent. She touched his hand, just her fingers over his. You make me want to believe that maybe I could let someone in without it destroying me. Nathaniel turned his hand over, letting their fingers lace together. What if we destroy each other? What if we don't? That's not a great risk assessment. No, but it's honest. Ava squeezed his hand. I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's real or if we're both just lonely people projecting onto each other. I don't know how we navigate the whole boss-employee thing without one of us getting hurt or fired or both. I don't know anything except that I want to find out. That's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. She smiled. Want to be terrified together? Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, taking in the tired blazer and cheap coffee stains and the courage it took to admit wanting something when wanting had cost her so much before. And he realized that Margaret was right. He needed to be all in or not at all. No hedging, no protecting himself, no careful distance, just the truth. "I'm falling for you," he said. "I have been since you walked into my office and refused to let me intimidate you. Every breakfast taco, every honest conversation, every moment you've made me feel like a person instead of a role. I've been falling, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not." Ava's eyes went wide. "Nathaniel, you don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know, because you asked what I want, and that's what I want. You, however that works, whatever that looks like. I want you." For a long moment, Ava just stared at him. Then she laughed, soft and disbelieving. "You're really bad at taking things slow, you know that?" "I know. I'm also bad at being vulnerable and talking about feelings and not trying to control situations I can't control. I'm a mess." "Yeah, well, I'm a mess too. We can be a mess together." She shifted closer until they were nearly touching. "I'm falling for you too, for the record. The grumpy billionaire who forgot how to feel things, who looks at his daughter like she's the only good thing he's ever done, who stands in break rooms spilling coffee because he's too distracted by his assistant to function. That guy. I'm falling for that guy. That guy's terrified." "Good. So am I." They sat there in the courtyard, surrounded by olive trees and city noise and the weight of everything they'd just admitted, and Nathaniel felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This was real. Whatever happened next, however complicated it got, however many obstacles they'd have to navigate, this moment was real. Ava leaned closer, her shoulder pressing against his, and Nathaniel wrapped his arm around her without overthinking it. She fit against him like she'd been designed for that exact space, her head resting on his shoulder while evening settled around them. "We should probably figure out the logistics," she said quietly. "The work thing, the power dynamic thing, how we keep this from becoming a disaster that ruins both our lives." "We should," Nathaniel agreed, "but maybe not right now. Right now, let's just sit here and be terrified together." "I can do that." They stayed in that courtyard for another hour, talking about nothing important, existing in the space between wanting and having, between fear and hope, between the people they'd been and the people they might become together. When Nathaniel finally drove Ava back to her car, he didn't want to let her go. But he did, because rushing this would only make the fear worse. "Tomorrow," Ava said, standing by her car door, "we figure out how to make this work without burning down everything we've built." "Tomorrow," Nathaniel agreed. She started to get in her car, then turned back. "Nathaniel?" "Yeah? Thank you. For being honest. For being scared. For being human instead of just being careful." She smiled. "It means more than you know." After she drove away, Nathaniel sat in his car for 10 minutes, processing everything that had just happened. He'd told Ava he was falling for her. She'd said it back. They were doing this. Whatever this was, his phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Did you mess it up?" "No, I think it went well." "Good. Now invite her to dinner so I can interrogate her properly. Maria says I need to make sure she's good enough for you." Nathaniel smiled despite himself. "I think it's supposed to be the other way around. You're my dad. No one's good enough for you. But Ava seems close. I'll decide after dinner." He drove home feeling lighter than he had in 5 years, and when Emma ambushed him at the door demanding details, he gave them. Not everything, but enough. Enough for his daughter to hug him and say, "You look happy, Dad, like actually happy, not fake happy." "I am happy. It's terrifying." "That's because happiness is risky, but risk is good sometimes." She said it with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old who'd never had her heart broken. That night, Nathaniel lay in bed staring at his ceiling again, but this time instead of rehearsing conversations or cataloging fears, he just let himself feel hope, terror, excitement, vulnerability. All the things he'd spent 5 years avoiding because they made him human, and being human meant being breakable. But Ava was right. He was tired of being careful, tired of protecting himself from pain by refusing to feel anything at all, tired of existing instead of living. Tomorrow, they'd figure out logistics. Tomorrow, they'd navigate the complicated reality of dating someone who worked for him. Tomorrow, They'd face all the obstacles that made this a terrible idea. But tonight, just for tonight, Nathaniel let himself believe that maybe, possibly, he could have something real again. And that was enough. Tomorrow arrived with the kind of aggressive sunshine that made everything feel exposed. And Nathaniel woke up with the immediate panic of someone who'd made promises in the dark that now had to survive daylight. He'd told Ava he was falling for her. She'd set it back. Now they had to figure out how to make that work in a world that included HR policies, power dynamics, and the very real possibility that this could explode spectacularly and ruin both their lives. He got to the office early, which wasn't unusual. What was unusual was finding Ava already there, sitting at her desk with 2 cups of coffee and an expression that suggested she'd slept about as well as he had. "Morning," she said. "Morning." They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of last night hanging between them. Then Ava laughed, breaking the tension. "This is so weird. Extremely weird. Want to have the logistics conversation now or pretend to work for a few hours first?" "Now. Let's just get it over with." Nathaniel gestured toward his office. They sat across from each other at his conference table, coffee between them like a buffer against whatever came next. "Okay," Ava said, pulling out a notebook that suggested she'd been planning this conversation. "First issue. I work for you. That's a problem." "It doesn't have to be." "Yes, it does. If we're dating and I'm your assistant, every decision you make about me looks like favoritism. Every raise, every promotion, every good assignment, people will assume I earned it on my back instead of my merit." The crude honesty of it stung. "People will talk regardless." "True. But I'd rather they talk about something that isn't true than have legitimate grounds to question whether I deserve to be here." Ava tapped her pen against the notebook. "So option 1, I find a new job." "No." "Nathaniel, you're the best assistant I've had in 6 years. I'm not losing you because of this." "Then option 2, I transfer to a different department, same company, different reporting structure." Nathaniel considered this. "You'd be working for someone else. That's kind of the point. I don't like it." "You don't have to like it. You just have to accept that this is the only way we do this without completely compromising my professional credibility." Ava met his eyes. "I need this, Nathaniel. I need to know that anything I achieve here is because I earned it, not because I'm sleeping with the CEO." "We're not sleeping together. Yet. But if this goes where I think it's going, we will be eventually, and I need the professional separation before that happens." The practicality of it was both admirable and frustrating. Nathaniel wanted to argue, to find some loophole that let him keep her close without sacrificing her credibility. But she was right. She was always right about this stuff. "Fine," he said. "Transfer. Where?" "Marketing needs a project coordinator. It's technically a lateral move, same pay, but different skill set. I'd be reporting to David Chen." "David's good. Fair. Won't hold the relationship against you." "That's what I thought." Ava made a note. "Okay, issue 2. Emma?" Nathaniel felt his chest tighten. "What about her? She's 7. She gets attached to people. If this doesn't work out, I don't want to be another person who disappears from her life." Ava's voice softened. "I like her, Nathaniel. A lot. But we need to be careful about how we introduce this relationship to her. She already knows I like you. She's been interrogating me about it for weeks. Liking someone and dating someone are different. Kids don't understand casual. They understand permanent. So if we're doing this, we go slow with Emma. Let her get to know me as a person before she knows me as your girlfriend." The word girlfriend hit Nathaniel like a physical thing. He'd been married. He'd had a long-term relationship, but somehow the idea of Ava being his girlfriend felt more significant than either of those things. "Okay," he managed. "Slow with Emma. What else?" "Money." Ava said it like she was ripping off a bandage. "You're a billionaire. I'm broke. That's going to create tension, and we need to address it head on instead of pretending it doesn't exist." "I'm not going to apologize for having money. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to respect that I don't want to be financially dependent on you. That means I pay for my own things. I don't accept expensive gifts. I don't move into your mansion. I don't let you solve my problems with your checkbook." "What if I want to help?" "Then you ask first, and you accept when I say no." Ava's jaw set stubbornly. "I've spent my whole life being poor, Nathaniel. It's shaped who I am. I'm not ashamed of it, and I won't let you treat it like something that needs fixing." The echo of their conversation in his car weeks ago was deliberate. She was setting boundaries, and Nathaniel realized this was a test. Could he love her without trying to rescue her? Could he respect her autonomy even when it frustrated him? Okay, he said. No throwing money at problems, no expensive gifts. You maintain financial independence. Thank you. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the reality of what they were agreeing to. Then Nathaniel said, I have a condition too. What? Honesty. Complete honesty. If something's bothering you, you tell me. If you're having doubts, you tell me. If I'm being an asshole or crossing a line or making you uncomfortable, you tell me immediately. No protecting my feelings. No avoiding conflict because I'm your boss or because you're worried about making things awkward. Ava studied him carefully. You really want that? Because honesty isn't always pretty. I want real. Pretty's optional. Okay. Then I'll start with honesty right now. She leaned forward. I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm going to screw this up. I'm scared that you're going to realize I'm too damaged or too difficult or too poor to fit into your life. I'm scared that Emma's going to hate me or that your friends are going to look at me like I'm a gold digger or that I'm going to wake up one day and realize this was all just a beautiful mistake. The vulnerability in her voice cracked something open in Nathaniel's chest. I'm scared too, he admitted. I'm scared that I don't know how to be in a relationship anymore, that I've been emotionally unavailable for so long that I've forgotten how to be present. I'm scared that I'm going to hurt you or disappoint you or prove that I'm exactly as broken as I think I am. And I'm terrified that Emma's going to get attached to you. And then something's going to go wrong, and I'll have to watch my daughter lose another person she cares about. Ava reached across the table, taking his hand. So we're both terrified. Completely terrified. Want to do it anyway? Nathaniel squeezed her hand. Yeah, I really do. They sat there holding hands across his conference table, two broken people choosing to be broken together, and it felt more real than anything Nathaniel had experienced in 5 years. Margaret knocked on the glass door, then entered without waiting for permission. She took one look at them, smiled, and said, HR needs to know about the relationship, and Ava's transfer request needs to be submitted by end of day if she wants to start in marketing next week. You knew about the transfer? Nathaniel asked. I know about everything. It's literally my job. Margaret set down a folder. I took the liberty of drafting the transfer paperwork. All Ava needs to do is sign it, and I already spoke to David Chen. He's thrilled to have her. After Margaret left, Ava shook her head in disbelief. She's terrifyingly efficient. That's why I pay her obscene amounts of money. How much is obscene? More than you make, less than you deserve. Nathaniel stood up, pulling Ava with him. Sign the transfer papers. Start fresh in marketing. Let me take you to dinner this weekend. Real dinner, not coffee. Somewhere nice but not obnoxious. And we'll figure the rest out as we go. That's not much of a plan. No, but it's honest. Ava signed the transfer papers that afternoon. By Friday, she was officially working in marketing, and Nathaniel had a new assistant who was perfectly competent and absolutely not Ava, which made every day feel slightly off balance. But it was worth it, because now when Ava showed up at his office, it wasn't as his employee. It was as someone who chose to be there, someone who wanted to see him instead of being obligated to. The difference mattered more than Nathaniel had expected. Their first real date happened that Saturday. Nathaniel picked a restaurant that was nice without being pretentious, made reservations under a fake name to avoid attention, and showed up at Ava's apartment in jeans instead of a suit because she'd specifically requested normal Nathaniel, not corporate Nathaniel. Ava opened the door wearing a dress that probably cost $30 but looked perfect on her, and Nathaniel forgot how to speak for a full 5 seconds. You clean up nice, she said, smiling. You look beautiful. Flattery will get you everywhere. She grabbed her jacket. Fair warning, I'm going to order the most expensive thing on the menu just to see if you actually meant that thing about me maintaining financial independence. I'm paying for dinner, Ava. I know. I'm testing your commitment to not making a big deal about money. She was teasing, but there was real curiosity underneath it. Dinner was easy in a way Nathaniel hadn't expected. They talked about everything and nothing. Books, movies, Ava's disastrous attempt to learn guitar in college, Nathaniel's brief phase thinking he wanted to be an architect before business school happened. The conversation flowed without the careful navigation of their coffee date, like they'd moved past the first layer of getting to know each other into something more comfortable. Can I ask about Sarah? Ava said over dessert, her voice careful. Nathaniel tensed automatically, then forced himself to relax. What do you want to know? Whether it bothers you that I'm asking, whether you need me to not mention her, whether Emma talks about her. Ava set down her fork. I don't want to be competing with a ghost, but I also don't want to pretend she didn't exist. The honesty was jarring and necessary. Emma talks about her sometimes, Nathaniel said quietly. She has memories, though I'm not sure how many are real versus things she's constructed from photos and stories. We have pictures up in the house. I never wanted Emma to feel like her mother was a secret. That's good. That's healthy. As for competing with ghosts, you're not. Sarah was important. She shaped who I am. But she's gone, and I've spent 5 years learning how to live with that. He met Ava's eyes. You're not a replacement. You're something entirely new. What if I'm not as good? What if you're just different? What if that's enough? Ava smiled, and something settled between them that felt like understanding. After dinner, they walked along Ladybird Lake, the Austin skyline reflecting off the water like scattered light. Ava slipped her hand into his like it was the most natural thing in the world, and Nathaniel realized he hadn't held someone's hand in years. Emma wants to meet you properly, he said. Like, have you over for dinner. Fair warning, she's going to interrogate you about your intentions. I have very honorable intentions. Do you, though? Absolutely not. I plan to corrupt you completely. She squeezed his hand. But yes, I'd love to have dinner with Emma, as long as you're prepared for the possibility that she'll like me more than she likes you. I'm already prepared for that. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, and Nathaniel felt something he hadn't felt since before Sarah died. Contentment. Not happiness exactly, because happiness felt too fragile and temporary. But contentment. The sense that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, with exactly who he was supposed to be with. Thank you, he said quietly. For what? For being patient with me, for calling me on my bullshit, for making me feel like being broken isn't a deal breaker. Ava stopped walking, turning to face him. Nathaniel, we're all broken. That's just being human. The question isn't whether you're broken, it's whether you're willing to let someone see the broken parts and love you anyway. Are you? Willing to love you anyway? She smiled. I think I already do. The words hit him like a freight train. She loved him. This woman who'd known him for less than 3 months, who'd seen him at his worst and his most vulnerable, who had every reason to protect herself from men with power and money and emotional unavailability, she loved him anyway. Nathaniel cupped her face in his hands, searching her eyes for any sign that she was just saying what he wanted to hear. All he saw was truth. I love you too, he said, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in years. Then he kissed her. Not carefully, not tentatively, but the way someone kisses another person when words stop being enough, and the only thing that matters is being close. Ava kissed him back like she'd been waiting for this, her hands fisting in his shirt, pulling him closer while the city moved around them completely unnoticed. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ava laughed. Well, that escalated quickly. Too fast? Maybe, but I don't care. She pulled him down for another kiss, briefer this time. Take me home before I do something inappropriate in public. Nathaniel drove her back to her apartment, kissed her goodnight at her door like a gentleman, even though everything in him wanted to follow her inside, and then sat in his car processing the fact that he was in love. Actually, genuinely in love for the first time since Sarah died. It was terrifying and exhilarating and so far outside his comfort zone that he didn't know how to categorize it. When he got home, Emma was waiting up, despite it being past her bedtime. Did you kiss her? She asked immediately. That's none of your business. You totally kissed her. You have that look. What look? The look people get when they're being gross and romantic. Emma studied him seriously. Do you love her? Nathaniel sat down on the couch next to his daughter, pulling her into his side. Yeah, I think I do. Good, because I already like her, and it would be awkward if you didn't. Emma yawned, leaning against him. When can she come over for real? Like for dinner and meeting me properly? Soon, but Em, this is new. And sometimes new things don't work out. So we need to be careful about getting too attached too fast. Dad, you're already attached, I can tell. And Ava's attached too. I saw the way she looked at you. Emma said it with absolute confidence. So stop trying to protect me from things that are good. Sometimes good things actually work out. Out of the mouths of 7-year-olds. Nathaniel kissed the top of his daughter's head. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You just don't usually listen. Ava came to dinner the following weekend. Nathaniel had wanted to hire a chef, get catering, make everything perfect. Ava had threatened to cancel if he did any of those things. So instead, they cooked together. Pasta from scratch, because Emma insisted, garlic bread that burned slightly around the edges, and a salad that Ava assembled while Nathaniel tried not to be useless in his own kitchen. Emma watched the whole thing with the intensity of a documentary filmmaker, asking Ava questions that ranged from reasonable to absolutely invasive. What's your favorite color? Green, like forest green, not lime green. Do you like kids? I do, yes. Do you want kids? Emma, Nathaniel warned. What? It's a valid question. Emma turned back to Ava. Do you? Someday, maybe. If the situation's right. Ava met Nathaniel's eyes briefly before focusing back on Emma. But I'm also happy being around kids without having my own. Like you, for instance. I enjoy spending time with you. Even when I ask invasive questions? Especially then. It means you care about your dad enough to vet the people in his life. That seemed to satisfy Emma, who moved on to questions about marine biology, favorite books, and whether Ava thought octopuses were aliens. Dinner was chaotic and messy, and exactly what Nathaniel's house had been missing for 5 years. Laughter. Easy conversation. The sense that his home was a place where people actually lived instead of just existed. After dinner, Emma insisted on showing Ava her room, which meant a 40-minute tour of every stuffed animal, poster, and school project she'd accumulated over 7 years of life. Nathaniel followed, watching Ava give each item the kind of serious attention most adults couldn't sustain for that long. And this is my mom, Emma said, pointing to a framed photo on her nightstand. She died when I was little. Ava picked up the photo carefully, studying it. She was beautiful. Dad says I look like her. You do. Same smile. Ava set the photo back down gently. You must miss her. Sometimes. But it's hard to miss someone you don't really remember. Emma said it matter-of-factly, the way kids did when they'd processed difficult things adults struggled with. Do you have parents? My mom died a few years ago. My dad wasn't around much when I was growing up. Ava sat down on Emma's bed. So I get it, the missing someone thing. Does it get easier? It gets different. You learn to carry it instead of being crushed by it. Emma climbed onto the bed next to Ava, leaning against her in a gesture of casual trust that made Nathaniel's throat tighten. I'm glad you're here. Dad's been sad for a long time. He pretends he's not, but I can tell. I know, Ava said quietly, but I think he's getting better. Because of you. Maybe. Or maybe he was ready to get better, and I just happened to show up at the right time. After Emma finally crashed from sugar and excitement, Nathaniel walked Ava to her car. Your daughter's incredible, Ava said. She likes you. That's rare. Emma's usually very suspicious of new people. Because she's been disappointed before? Because she's protective of me. She knows I'm a mess and she's trying to make sure I don't get hurt again. Nathaniel pulled Ava close, wrapping his arms around her. Thank you for tonight, for being patient with her questions, for treating her like a person instead of an obstacle. She's not an obstacle. She's the best part of you. Ava looked up at him. And for the record, I'm falling more in love with you every time I see you with her. The way you look at her like she's the only thing that matters. The way you let her ask inappropriate questions because you respect her curiosity. The way you're terrified of screwing her up but show up anyway. She kissed him softly. You're a good dad, Nathaniel. Better than you give yourself credit for. After she left, Nathaniel stood in his driveway for a long time, processing the fact that his life was becoming something he'd stopped believing was possible. The months that followed weren't perfect. They fought about money when Nathaniel tried to pay for Ava's car repairs, and she refused. They fought about boundaries when he showed up at her apartment unannounced because he was worried about her. They fought about the future when Ava insisted she wanted to build her own career instead of relying on his connections. But they also learned. Nathaniel learned that loving someone didn't mean fixing their problems. It meant standing beside them while they fixed their own problems and offering support without taking over. He learned that Ava's independence wasn't a rejection of him. It was the foundation of who she was, and respecting it was the only way to love her honestly. Ava learned that accepting help didn't make her weak, that letting Nathaniel drive her to work when her car died wasn't dependence. It was trust, that she could maintain her autonomy while still being part of something bigger than herself. Emma learned that love didn't mean replacing her mother, that Ava wasn't trying to be Sarah. She was just being Ava, and that was enough. And slowly, carefully, they built something that looked like a family. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Ava moved in with them after a year, not because Nathaniel pushed, but because her lease ended and Emma had been campaigning for months. And it just made sense. She kept her own bank account, insisted on contributing to household expenses in whatever way she could afford, and maintained her independence even as she became integrated into their lives. She got promoted twice in marketing, both times on her own merit, and Nathaniel learned to celebrate her successes without trying to claim credit for them. Emma started calling her Ava instead of Dad's girlfriend, a title that felt more permanent and meaningful than anything else. And one autumn evening, almost 2 years after that first coffee date, Nathaniel found Ava standing under the olive trees in that same downtown courtyard where they'd first admitted they were falling for each other. "What are we doing here?" she asked. "I wanted to show you something." Nathaniel pulled a small box from his pocket, and Ava's eyes went wide. "Nathaniel, before you panic, this isn't what you think." He opened the box to reveal not a ring, but a key. "I bought the courtyard." "You what?" "The building owner was selling. I bought the whole property. The courtyard's protected now. They can't tear it down or pave it over or turn it into something commercial." He pressed the key into her hand. "This is where we chose each other, where we stopped being careful. I wanted to make sure it stayed." Ava stared at the key, tears forming in her eyes. "You bought a courtyard." "I bought a memory. Our memory. That's the most ridiculously romantic thing anyone's ever done for me." "Good, because I'm not done." Nathaniel pulled out a second box. This one held a ring, simple, elegant, nothing ostentatious. "I know we said we'd take things slow. I know you have concerns about power dynamics and independence and all the very valid reasons this is complicated. But I also know that I don't want to imagine my life without you in it. You've made me human again, Ava. You've made Emma happier than I've seen her in years. You've made our house feel like a home instead of a mausoleum." "Soy was. Nathaniel, I'm not asking you to give up who you are. I'm asking you to build a life with me where you can be exactly who you are while I try to be worthy of that." He dropped to one knee and Ava's hand flew to her mouth. "Marry me. Not because I need you to validate me or complete me or any of that bullshit, but because I love you and I want to choose you every day for the rest of my life." Ava was crying now, full tears streaming down her face. "You're really bad at taking things slow." "I know. It's a character flaw. Say yes anyway." "Yes," she laughed through tears. "Yes, you impossible man. Yes." Nathaniel slid the ring onto her finger, stood up, and kissed her while the city moved around them just like it had 2 years ago, completely unaware that two broken people were choosing to build something whole together. "Emma's going to lose her mind," Ava said when they finally broke apart. "Emma helped pick the ring. She's been keeping this secret for 3 weeks. You involved our 7-year-old in your proposal?" "Our 9-year-old. And yes, because she pointed out that any decision that affects our family should include her input." Nathaniel pulled Ava close. "She voted yes, by the way. Unanimously. They got married 6 months later in a small ceremony that included Emma as the world's most enthusiastic flower girl, Margaret as Ava's maid of honor, and about 30 people who actually mattered instead of the society wedding Nathaniel's status would have demanded. Ava wore a dress that cost less than most people's monthly rent and looked more beautiful than anything designer could have created. Nathaniel cried during his vows, which Emma later described as gross but also kind of sweet. And when the officiant pronounced them married, Emma cheered so loudly that half the guests laughed. The reception was held in the courtyard Nathaniel had bought, under strings of lights and olive trees that had witnessed their beginning. During their first dance, Ava whispered, "I can't believe this is my life." "Good or bad?" "Terrifying and perfect and nothing like I planned, exactly what I needed." She rested her head on his shoulder. Thank you for being broken enough to understand me. Thank you for being brave enough to love me anyway. Years later, when people asked Nathaniel how he knew Ava was the one, he'd tell them about the coffee cup, about standing in a break room overflowing a cup because he was too distracted by someone who saw him as a person instead of a bank account, about a woman who'd called him an asshole in a job interview and still got hired, about someone who made breakfast tacos in her tiny apartment and left them on his desk without expecting anything in return, about the moment he realized that real love wasn't about rescuing someone or being rescued. It was about two people choosing to see each other fully, broken parts and all, and deciding that was enough. Ava would add that Nathaniel forgot to mention the part where he was a disaster who didn't know how to microwave food and needed constant reminding to eat lunch. Emma would point out that they were both disasters, and that's why they worked. And she wouldn't be wrong, because sometimes the best relationships aren't the ones where two perfect people find each other. They're the ones where two imperfect people decide that perfect is overrated and choose each other anyway. Nathaniel Hayes had spent 5 years convinced he was broken beyond repair, that love was too dangerous, that staying emotionally distant was safer than risking his heart again. Then Ava Morales walked into his office and proved that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let someone see you completely, the good, the bad, the terrified, the hopeful, and trust that they'll stay. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real. And real, it turned out, was worth risking everything for.